If you haven't already watched my top 10 most overrated roller coasters video, go check it out. I uploaded that one back in February, but have since realized that I left out several coasters that I've been disappointed by. I have ridden 672 roller coasters across 10 different countries as of this video's recording. Some of these have incredible reputations and end up living up to the hype. Others I find to be underrated, and some I would consider to be overrated. Today we'll be talking about just that. Now, something to note is just because I consider a roller coaster to be overrated doesn't mean it's a bad ride. Matter of fact, all of the rides on this list are far from bad. A few even rank inside my top 100, which, when you've ridden 672 roller coasters, is in the top 15% of coasters I've ever ridden. But now that we have that established, let's dive into the list. Here's 10 more of the most overrated roller coasters I've ridden. Number 10, Riddler Mindbender at Six Flags Over Georgia. Now this is an interesting one because Riddler Mindbender, in its current state, is a ride that doesn't exactly get the most amount of love. Part of that has to do with the fact that a lot of enthusiasts who have ridden this coaster have only experienced it as just Mindbender. The classic Schwarzkopf looper opened in 1978 and ran until 2019 when it was due for a refurbishment. But Mindbender in its former state was always considered to be one of the best Schwarzkopfs in the country, if not the world. Unfortunately, Riddler Mindbender didn't come anywhere close for me, and I feel bad saying that because I was lucky enough to attend the media event Six Flags held for the grand reopening of the ride. As part of its makeover completed in 2021, the original trains were replaced with new shorter trains from B&M, and the trim brakes would slow riders considerably more than it used to help relieve stresses placed on the track. Because Schwarzkopfs have become so expensive to maintain, this is one of those situations where we've got to accept the changes made to Mindbender or lose it altogether. It reminds me a lot of the lightning rod situation at Dollywood. Against all odds, I'm hoping the park has figured something out to improve the ride experience, as I'm planning to ride this coaster again very soon. Number 9, Rishabanen at Tivoli Gardens. This is a case of a great coaster that some people rank way too high, creating unrealistic expectations for someone like me who doesn't know a whole lot about it. The ride opened in 1914 and is one of the oldest roller coasters in the world. Yet despite that, it runs extremely smooth and has more airtime than coasters 10 times its size. Now, I say more as in the quantity is a lot, but not in relates to quality. Rishabanen does feature quality airtime moments, but they weren't as dramatic as some have made it out to be. I do realize that it heavily depends on the brakeman or woman controlling the speed of the coaster, but as of when I rode it last year, I came off feeling a little underwhelmed. And it's a shame because I'd also say Tivoli Gardens was the most overrated theme park I went to in Europe. I honestly found the ride lineup to be pretty weak there, and it didn't help that my favorite attraction there was a bit of a letdown. Number 8, Yukon Striker at Canada's Wonderland. To be honest, I'm not sure this would have made the list if I were to rewrite it again today. Back when I rode this coaster in 2019, it was getting a lot of hype naturally because it was the big new thing. Since then, the community has quieted down when it comes to Yukon Striker, so I don't know, take this ranking as you will. Yukon Striker is the tallest and fastest dive coaster, standing 223 feet tall and reaching speeds of up to 80 miles per hour. Stat-wise, it's a very impressive coaster, but I don't know, when I rode the thing, I guess I was just expecting a little more. The elements in the first half are all visually impressive, but frankly don't feel much different from all of the other newer dive coasters like Valravn at Cedar Point. But I think the most disappointing thing about this ride was its second half, which is such a weak excuse for a second half of a coaster. It's basically just a small drop into a helix and that's it. I know why it has the mid-course brake run given the park's attendance, but gosh would it be so much cooler with that one. Number 7, White Lightning at Fun Spot Orlando. I feel like Mindblower at the Kissimmee Park is always the one getting mixed reviews. A lot of enthusiasts think it's too rough to enjoy, but no, me personally, I'd argue White Lightning is just as bad. Granted, I haven't ridden this coaster since the end of 2018, so I am due for some re-rides. I know since I last rode it, it's received small sections of Titan track, which helps, but only for a second or two. Since my rides on this thing, I have gotten on a near clone in Belgium called Heidi the Ride at Plopsaland, Japan. I was actually quite fond of that ride and found it to be so much smoother. It proved to me the potential that the layout has, so who knows, maybe when I get back on White Lightning, I'll like it more than I did before. Number 6, Hall's UberCop at Erlebnis Park Trips Trail. When I went to Europe last summer, I rode lots of really impressive roller coasters from Vekoma, but there was one that I rode that I walked off feeling a little disappointed by, and that's Hall's UberCop at Trips Trail. Now, this is the first and still only suspended thrill coaster Vekoma has ever built. It's essentially a reenactment to the suspended looping coaster model, which has become one of the most notoriously hated rides in the world. In that regard, Hall's UberCop was a big win because it is very smooth and fluid. But where I was left disappointed was in the forces department. Especially these moments where it looked like you get some pretty sweet airtime are very weak floater moments at best. I also have to say, I felt like it was lacking the intensity of the SLC. Don't hate me for saying this, but I might actually prefer that layout to this one. If you look at Great Nor'easter at Maury's Piers, that's the one SLC I've ridden that retains the original layout while offering a smooth, comfortable ride experience. I think I would take that ride any day over Hall's UberCop. And don't come at me saying that this is supposed to be a family-oriented ride and that's why it has minimal forces. The word thrill is literally in the model name, so I think they missed the mark with this one a bit. Number 5, Timber Terror at Silverwood. This is one that might get a lot of people scratching their heads because Timber Terror is not a ride that's really talked about much at all. But I remember a few years back, well before Stunt Pilot, a lot of people that visited this park went back and forth between this and Tremors for best coaster, let alone wooden coaster in the park. Now, it's to my knowledge that this ride used to have buzz bar restraints, but those were removed before my visit in 2021. If that's the case, well then that explains a lot. Of the big four coasters at Silverwood, I walked off Timber Terror feeling pretty underwhelmed. And that's a stark contrast to Tremors, which I absolutely loved, even though that one's never even had buzz bars. Timber Terror starts off fairly strong with a good first half, but everything after the turnaround is nearly just straight up boring. There's no airtime, no laterals, no nothing, and that slow pacing isn't something buzz bars could even fix. I'm guessing this ride had such a positive reputation back then because of its first half in particular. Think about Phoenix at Knoebels and how you go flying up out of your seat with those restraints. Now imagine riding it with the typical PTC lap bar. It just wouldn't be the same. All in all, Timber Terror is probably the only CCI I've ridden where I've walked off thinking, wow, that was just kind of mediocre. Number 4, Shockwave at Six Flags Over Texas. I'm sorry guys, I just don't get this one. Shockwave has such a fanfare, and I think it's great that it does because these classic Schwarzkopfs absolutely deserve to be loved and cherished. But when I hear people say that this is the best ride in the park, I nearly cringe. Let's quickly break down the layout. The two vertical loops are very good. Lots of positive G's there, but it's nothing you can't find on other Schwarzkopfs. Then come the airtime pops off the turnaround sections. This is a lot of the reason the ride is raved about by enthusiasts. The airtime reminds me a lot of the abrupt airtime in the second half of Magnum XL 200 at Cedar Point. It's just so out of nowhere while also being pretty uncomfortable in my opinion. It's also just not as strong as I was expecting, and this is coming from someone who got one ride on it in the very back of the train. Again, this is one of those coasters I might just need to re-ride and see if the sensations have maybe grown on me. But as of now, if you were to ask me what I think of Shockwave, I'd say it's good but not great. Number 3, Twisted Cyclone at Six Flags Over Georgia. Now we get to the point in the list where all of the following rides make my top 100. Twisted Cyclone is an RMC, so of course it is a great ride. However, of all the ones I've ridden, this has been the most disappointing, well aside from Lightning Rod, which we covered in the prequel to this video. I think where Twisted Cyclone falls flat is very clearly the length. Unlike something like Wicked Cyclone at Six Flags New England, which has 3 laps around the structure, Twisted Cyclone has just 2. But that's fine, I can excuse a short ride if it packs a major punch the whole way through. And to an extent, Twisted Cyclone does pack that punch, but when I hear enthusiasts say that this RMC runs faster than all the others, I just don't understand that. I heard the exact same argument for Storm Chaser at Kentucky Kingdom and also didn't get the hype. Overall, this is a coaster I'll always enjoy riding as it's got some superb airtime moments, but it is a flawed experience relative to a lot of the other RMC conversions. Number 2, Troy at Toverland. I've made it clear that this was one of the more disappointing coasters I rode in Europe. Don't get me wrong, I enjoyed riding it very much, but it's just not what a lot of the European enthusiasts made it out to be. To say this has the potential to be the very best GCI in Europe and one of the best overall doesn't sit well with me. Now, I have been told that 2022 was its roughest year in quite some time, so that probably didn't help. But I also just don't think the layout is the best of what GCI is capable of. In my opinion, there's too many of these high off the ground swooping turns and helixes that causes the pacing to be a bit all over the place. I much prefer when a GCI is staying low to the ground through rapid fire elements, which Troy does do at times, but it's not enough. If you ask me, Vote on Timber Coaster easily is the best GCI in Europe. That ride is awesome. And coming in at number 1 is Mystic Timbers at Kings Island. There's just a select few coasters I've been on where I have to wait to review them in my vlogs or on Instagram because I got up disappointed and needed another ride to assess what I just rode. The top 2 instances of this have been Terran at Phantasialand and this, both of which definitely grew on me the more I rode them, so don't get it twisted, I like both of those rides very much. The main difference is I can pinpoint what about Terran left me disappointed, but it's a lot harder for me to figure out why I didn't love Mystic Timbers as much as I was expecting. It's got great pacing, lots of airtime, a cool setting, but something about it left me wanting more. Maybe it was the fact that it felt shorter than I expected. Maybe it was the lack of intensity. This is a weird one, but maybe it was the fact that it felt overly smooth and lacked that wooden coaster bite that a lot of other GCIs have. Whatever the case, I don't understand how people can rank this thing so high. I vividly remember watching Coaster Studios' top 25 roller coasters list a few years ago, and he had it in there above rides like Twisted Timbers at King's Dominion.
Taking the number 20 spot is Mystic Timbers. This is my favorite GCI roller coaster.
Hell no, man. What the fuck, man?
Obviously, that's his opinion, I respect that, but for me, it's not even close. It's not my favorite GCI, matter of fact, it's not even in my top 3, but credit where credit is due, it is a high quality wooden coaster with lots to love about it. But with that being said, I hope you all enjoyed this video and don't feel like you have to show up to my house with pitchforks. If you'd like to see more content like this in the future, give me a like and subscribe to Coaster Dash as it helps us out against the YouTube algorithm. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you all very soon. Bye guys.